You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
I want to welcome Jessica M. Vaughan, who's the Director of Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. Jessica, it's a pleasure to have you on with Brett and John Rappaport of the Final Say Radio Show. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, Jessica, I want to ask you, there's something that's really bothering me, and it's the fact that when you have so many children coming here and coming in with diseases and you don't know exactly what's going on with them, isn't that a threat to our own children? And I'm doing something special today, and I apologize. I don't know if you hear my newborn in the background, but that is my new son, about 3 weeks old, and he's a little fussy in the background. But we have two guests on today who are talking about issues that really impact our children. And I just can't help but notice that our government, and particularly those who are supposed to protect us and our borders, are not putting Americans first in this case. We're not putting the interest of all those who are defenseless, like our newborns and our elderly and other people who have been sick, or people who are dealing with cancer and other diseases. And I think that is one of the most important parts of the immigration issue, and it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be really analyzed better, and I don't think it is. But I know you guys do. But I mean, just generally amongst our political people and in Washington, D.C. and other places. What do you think about that, Jessica?
Well, first of all, I just want to congratulate you on the birth of your son, I think you said.
Yes,
so
thank you.
I have two boys and two girls myself, and they're all teenagers now, but they're a blessing. All kids are a blessing. But you're right. Too often our immigration policy has been crafted on behalf of special interests who are acting either in what's best for immigrants who want to come here, or on behalf of employers who want to be able to bypass American workers for whatever reason. And it is very rare when the interests of American workers or the national interest, what would be best for our country, is foremost in policymaking. And I think it's, this crisis at the border is a perfect example of how the priority of the Obama administration has been to look after the needs of what they think is best for the people who want to come here and who are coming here illegally, and excusing the fact that they're breaking laws to get here, and they are using the resources of American taxpayers with abandon to accommodate these people, rather than looking at what would be the effects on all the communities where these people want to resettle, and how is that going to affect these communities and the people in them. What are going to be the effects on the wages of people who have to compete for jobs? What about the social services that have to be paid for by taxpayers, and all sorts of what if some of these turn out to be involved in criminal activity, and that's why they wanted to come here. None of this is ever taken into consideration. What does it say when their first act is, after sheltering them, is to give these illegal crossers a lawyer at taxpayer expense? It's very backwards at the moment, and I was very glad to see that finally Texas has stepped up and said, look, we need to stop the flow first, and then talk about what to do with all these people.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I know it's very difficult for the border states, California, Texas, and Arizona, and New Mexico, and having to constantly deal with these issues. And I think a lot of the rest of the country, until they start, being bussed in and trained and shipped and planed, and however they're being sent to other places now, until that happens, the other states really don't understand and fully appreciate the drain and the strain that it is on the economies of these particular states. And now I'm looking at just some different reporting on this, but there are a lot of serious diseases and illnesses that could be further introduced. We've already had this issue because of our illegal immigration, but things like tuberculosis and dengue fever and hepatitis and malaria and measles and so many more are being introduced back into our society, things that we've thought we've actually eradicated before. And I think this is an incredible health issue, and I actually just find it mind-boggling that on one hand you could have agencies that go after American companies for like things that you shake your head and wonder what, I don't even understand what they're talking about or what their concern is, but they ignore or almost participate in advancing problems with these other things that I just mentioned. And I think that's what's happening here.
Yeah, that is a legitimate concern, and especially when we have a situation like today where the Border Patrol and ICE are so overwhelmed with the numbers of people who are coming, they can't adequately process them and screen them and make sure that they are not spreading disease or, creating other problems. They simply are so overwhelmed, it's just not, they're not able to do that.
Oop, John? I'm sorry.
I'm
John
here.
was going to pop in there. Yeah, when I look at this, and I want to bring up one before I forget, there's another concern that I've had, and we've discussed this in the past, but as we're watching what's happening in Iraq in particular right now, which I know doesn't really relate to the immigration, but it does in a sense because you see people from, say, you have these terrorists from Syria that are going into Iraq to go wage war there. You have the Iranian influence, and it's a perfect lesson to us that there are bad people and bad organizations, whether they are the drug cartels or terrorist groups themselves, that could very easily slip through our southern border and do things that we really don't want to ever have happen again, as we have experienced in the past, in particular on 9/11. And I think that is of the greatest concern and really the biggest obligation that our president and the members of Congress have to protect our national security and defense of this nation.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's one set of problems when teenagers can manage to cross the border illegally who are, maybe trying to join family members who came illegally before them. But when it's possible for a teenager to get through, then we know that terrorist or criminal organizations are going to exploit the same vulnerability because they pay attention to what our policies are and how good our security is. And, it's a guarantee that they're going to be looking to take advantage of the fact that we are being very generous with teenagers and family members who are arriving here. It's guaranteed.
That's absolutely correct. Now, I have to ask you, because I know you guys follow this and you guys have seen this on the ground, and I know there have been many videos that you guys have put out there over the years covering just literally people walking across the border, and it's shocking, and some of the other things that you guys cover. But are some of the reporting that we see on the children, the other people, how they're being treated, some of the problems that are going on, the reports of sexual activity or drug abuse or whatever it is, what kind of things are actually going on that are being properly reported, and what isn't being reported?
Well, there's very little that is being disclosed to either the public or the news media. They are only, it's kind of reminiscent of, China under Mao Zedong or, the Soviet Union, the way they're controlling information and controlling access to these holding facilities for the people that they've caught recently. We don't know exactly what the conditions are. We're told that they are being provided with food, shelter, clothing, and recreational activities and probably ultimately schooling at some point. But nobody really knows because they won't allow any more than a handful of reporters in to see the spaces. And, frankly, they're doing this by the seat of their pants. There was a plan for a mass migration emergency, but the administration seems to have tossed that in the trash and come up with their own plan of how they want to handle this, and they want to treat it as if it's some kind of refugee crisis rather than illegal immigration inspired by lax enforcement, which is what the people who are coming say it is. So there really is very little information. I wish I could answer that question, but I am pretty sure that they're not being abused by our government officials. If there are problems, it's because there are so many people in such confined circumstances that it's out of control. And the answer is to stop a flow of more people coming, and secondly, try to keep these people in the border area and return them home as quickly as possible.
I agree with that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Jessica, it's interesting how you look at the combination of subject matters and how important each of those are. We've spoke about healthcare implications, both about injecting new healthcare issues as well as impacting our already taxed healthcare system. You talk about crime and security, and when you speak about that, we remember we have an enormous drug and gang population problem here. In fact, there's so much effort that goes toward the idea of gun control. But if you look at the CDC's own statistics, an incredible amount of that actually emanates from drug and gang violence, and our lack of border security is a huge contributor to that. I wanted to turn your attention to something that I haven't yet seen come out in the press, but I heard it very carefully listening to a Hillary Clinton speech yesterday. And she was basically, on the one hand, Hillary, to her credit, and it's not that often I give her a lot of credit, to her credit, she actually said she does not believe that we should have these children staying here simply because they stepped foot on American soil, roughly the words that she used. But here's the thing that really got me. Hillary made mention specifically that America needs to do more to help Mexico enforce their southern border. And that seemed to go under everybody's radar, and that jumped out to me as saying, what about our southern border? We're not supposed to protect Mexico's southern border. They have a constitution for that. We have a constitution that requires our government to first and foremost protect and defend our borders.
Well, you're absolutely right, of course. That is our first responsibility. On the other hand, we have had a lot of success in the past with stopping these people from getting to Mexico to begin with, because the Mexican government can't really be counted on to, prevent people from crossing, into the United States. And, there are a lot of problems with corruption and collusion with the cartels that control all of the crossing routes between Mexico and the United States. But it is true that if we could nip this problem, a little bit closer to Central America, that there would be a lot, fewer of them who would manage to get across. I mean, after all, it's very dangerous for them to travel through Mexico, especially in the hands of smugglers. And, we would be a lot better off stopping this farther upstream, closer to the source, and, just not put people in the position where they're vulnerable to exploitation in Mexico either. And, it's a lot cheaper that way, too, to help the Mexicans stop some of it. And we have a lot of leverage with Mexico that we could use if we chose. But we're choosing, not to. And, they have no reason, why would they lift a finger on our behalf unless we, kind of pressed them on it and made it uncomfortable for them not to. So, I'm only answer, but that's a part of the answer, is to, try to stop a lot of this before it gets close to our soil, because, once they get to U.S. soil, it's game over for us in terms of trying to actually remove people. The idea is to keep them from getting here to begin with.
So there may be some logic to that. I guess it just hit a real nerve to me that the same people who constantly fight against any viable security efforts on our border would spend American dollars given to a country that is known for, I don't know any other way to say it, but inbred corruption. I mean, it's literally seems to be in the Mexican DNA.
It is, it is in a sense a way of avoiding the fact that we could stop it on our own if we want to. So, if this is their only solution is to work with Mexico, well, that's a cop-out. But if that's part, I would support having that be part of the solution. But, the fact is, we have Border Patrol. We have Coast Guard with boats. Border Patrol has boats. We have National Guard. We could put all of those assets right on our southern border and stop these people from getting across. It's a lot cheaper if we can, have a smaller flow of them who are actually able to make an attempt at our border. But, to expect that, the only solution is partnership with Mexico, that's just a cop-out. You're right about that.
Right. Now I will let me introduce another angle to this I want to get your opinion on, because in this show, The Final Say, we spend a lot of time on geopolitical subjects. I don't want to distract from the immigration topic at hand. However, one of our biggest global problems stems from our relationship with China, which is horribly one-sided and very much negatively affects the American job market. And, of course, immigration also negatively affects the American job market. It would seem to me that one of the best ways, we have very little, you say we have leverage, but history tells me, and I've worked down in Mexico as well with some very high-level folks, and my experience is that the corruption is so significant that, kind of like America not being able to deal with Russia in a business sense, it's not going to be easy to do. However, inside of our borders, there's nothing stopping us from spending a significant amount, and let me reuse the word spending, reallocating money that would otherwise be thrown into an empty pool of buying foreign voters for the Democratic Party, and instead give work visas and set up, put much greater investment into free trade zones located within our borders. Don't send the money back to Mexico. Allow those people who are already enmassed on the Mexican border to come here, but make it very clear there are no freebies for those who violate the laws. But if you come here on a work visa, absolutely, you can come here, you can work for American companies, and we welcome you to move American dollars down into Mexico to help your families, but you're going to do so working for companies that are in these free trade zones. And I know there's been efforts in that in the past, but it seems to me that those efforts have, for the most part, been a very, very minor and probably poorly managed.
Well, that's right, because and the sticking point in having successful guest worker programs boils down to the fact that we need to actually enforce the rules. And that's, what causes people to lose confidence in them, that, people do stay on after their visa expires or find other ways to abuse the program. If we enforce the rules, they would be more manageable and there would be less abuse, and, we wouldn't have so many problems. But, when these guest worker programs just become conduits for more illegal immigration, that's a problem. And so we need to insist that the rules be adhered to and that the laws be enforced as a condition for having these guest worker programs. I mean, we can argue about whether or not they're necessary, whether there's an economic need, whether or not they displace American workers, all of which are legitimate concerns. But we shouldn't have, even the best conceived and needed guest worker program is a failure if it's causing other problems and resulting in more illegal immigration.
Yeah, I would agree fully with that. And one of the things that bothers me the most out of this entire thing is I believe wholeheartedly that the single, far more important than the value of any one or any number of American lives is our system itself and the rule of law, because what makes America great and what has made us such a strong power of force for good in the world over the last 200 plus years is the fact that we are a nation, or at least we are in theory a nation of laws, not a dictatorial ruling class that gets to decide how the game is played, which is historically how the world works. And immigration and all that surrounds it seems to be one of the major pieces for actually undermining and diminishing that rule of law, and as a side effect is potentially creating a taker class, if you will, of people that could become very quickly a majority voting bloc, which, from our founding fathers' own words, right, is the way you kill a democracy. When people realize they can, more than 51% of the people realize they can vote themselves a raise, the whole system can come crumbling down to the ground very quickly, and I feel we're well on our way to that happening.
Well, I hope not, but you're right. The attraction of America to immigrants is largely our rule of law and the fact that we are a successful democracy. And so, to the extent that we move away from that is sadly ironic if that's why immigrants are coming here.
That's absolutely correct. Jessica, I think this is a story, it's a long ongoing story, if you will, that really hasn't been properly addressed. And I think another major concern here is the fact that, we keep saying that we have to fix immigration and everything else that's going on, but the fact is we've had laws in place and many of these laws haven't been properly being followed. And in fact, I think in a lot of cases they're being abused. And I think that, it's hard for a member of Congress or somebody who really wants to deal with this issue and try to resolve some of the problems that we have with immigration and illegal immigration. It's hard to go into negotiations when you don't trust what's happening in front of you to begin with. In other words, we're already not listening to and following the current laws, and we're also dealing with somebody who, might not necessarily, meaning the administration, follow through on the things that are negotiated in any kind of bills to resolve some of the issues. And I think it's kind of handcuffed the entire country. And I would also add that I really feel and do believe that what we see going on the border now is being done to help push this country into having to make a decision on immigration. And I think it's a sad case and it's a sad state. And I just hope that calmer and cooler and smarter, more intelligent heads could prevail, and that we could back off and maybe start taking the initial steps that many of us have recommended, such as border security and things of that nature first. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it requires we have to send these people somewhere else or back to where they came from, and let the UN step in and provide the aid and security and things that they need. But I think we already have a big enough problem here.
Yeah, I mean, the question of conditions in these sending countries is a long-term problem that our immigration policy cannot solve on its own. And we can only help a fraction of the people who are living in less than desirable conditions. And so we shouldn't look to immigration policy to solve it. You're right, this issue of trust that the laws are going to be enforced is what's held up immigration reform so far. And I think the House Republicans have a legitimate point when they say, look, we've got to have confidence that the laws are going to be enforced first before we embark on a major rewrite of immigration laws that is going to result in more immigration. Let's, get to a point where we feel like the situation's under control first.
Exactly, and right now I feel like there's almost zero trust. But anyway, Jessica M. Vaughan, who's the Director of Policy Studies with the Center for Immigration Studies, and of course that is CIS.org, if I'm correct?
That's right.
That's right. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, and you guys are always welcome, and we refer to the things that you guys work on all the time, and again, please feel free to join us again and pick up this conversation.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.